Good evening and welcome to the Book Club of California's online and in-person program titled Digger Do, Excavating a Social Movement Through Its Print Ephemera. My name is Kevin Kosick and I'm the Executive Director for the Book Club of California. It's my pleasure to welcome you and host the program this evening. Now, for those of you that are new to the Book Club of California, we are a nonprofit member and donor supported organization that is dedicated to preserving and promoting the history of the book and the book arts. Oftentimes we do that with a focus on the history and the literature of California and the West. The Book Club publishes limited edition, finely made books. We have a scholarly journal and club newsletter, and we have keepsakes for our members and guests. We host a year-round series of programs and exhibitions like the one this evening on topics including fine printing, design, typography, bookbinding, collecting, California history, and much, much more. Now, if you're not a member of the book club or if your membership has lapsed and you're interested in what we do, please consider joining our century-long tradition. Our membership dues are modest, the benefits are many, and we simply can't do the work of the book club without the support of our members. So I encourage you to go online to bccbooks.org to find out more or to join. Now, tonight's program again is titled Digger Do, Excavating a Social Movement Through Its Print Ephemera. And our speaker is Eric Noble. Alexander Aiken, a partner at Bolarian Books and the current president of the Antiquarian Booksellers Association of America, will introduce our speaker. Alexander.
Hi, good evening, everyone. So as Kevin mentioned, the ABAA is hosting the big International Antiquarian Book Fair at the end of February over at Pier 27. There's a stack of postcards over there if you haven't picked one up yet. The Book Club of California has long been one of our most important cultural partners and has often generously offered to host speakers in conjunction with our events. Now, because this year is the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence, the theme of this year's book fair is American Revolutionary Moments, not just the Revolution of 1776, but the many subsequent revolutions, artistic, industrial, political, scientific, cultural, that have shaped this country in the years since then. You'll see exhibitors highlighting material that documents uniquely transformative moments in American history, as well as all sorts of other amazing things. So anyway, when Kevin said that the book club would welcome a speaker ahead of the fair, I immediately thought of our speaker tonight, Eric Noble. He's what we might call a participant historian in one of the great revolutionary moments of the 20th century, the San Francisco counterculture. Eric maintains the Digger archives, which you'll hear about tonight. They're dedicated to preserving the legacy of the Diggers, as well as Kaliflower, actual original examples of Kaliflower here, which I couldn't believe. These sell for hundreds of dollars at the book fair. Tonight, you can have a chance to look through them yourself. Now, Eric has been building his archive for decades, and he has known many of the people involved personally. We're lucky to have some of the people involved personally present tonight in the audience. I think that Eric's project, sharing his knowledge with the community, is very much a continuation of the spirit that originally animated these movements. A continuous act of creativity and generosity, sharing his knowledge. I can't think of anyone more qualified to speak on the topic. And so without further ado, Eric Noble.
Thank you, Alexander. Well, good evening. The Diggers were a group of radical street activists in the 1960s San Francisco who believed that culture should be free. Food, art, medicine, performance, all of it. They staged happenings, ran free stores. Oh, excuse me. I have to turn on the mic.
Not everyone's as loud as I am.
There we go. You want me to start over?
Yeah, that'd be great.
Okay. The Diggers were a group of radical street activists in San Francisco in the 1960s who believed that culture should be free, food, art, medicine, performance, all of it. They staged happenings, ran free stores, fed the neighborhood, and published a torrent of mimeographed manifestos. At one point, one of the original diggers dubbed me the folk archivist of the digger movement, largely because of my incessant and bothersome habit of begging and borrowing the ephemera that people had kept as souvenirs. In 1993, at a conference of law school computer nerds, I saw a demonstration of the first graphical web browser. Within weeks, I started building a website for my collection. I called it the Digger Archives. Ironically, once the archive went online, prices skyrocketed. The things people had been happy to give away became valuable collectibles. I couldn't afford the prices rare book dealers were asking, but the website and the collection have flourished. Numerous students, writers, and historians have used the archive over the decades. And I still receive donations of stray pieces of paper. Welcome to the Digger Archives. This is a sample of the roughly 800 items in the Digger Archives, which I've been building since 1968. I dropped out of college and came to San Francisco in part to find the diggers. And when I arrived in 1969, characteristically late to the party, the diggers had already dispersed, but their traces remained. I ended up living in the Kaliflower commune, which was a direct recipient of what I call digger dharma. From that point on, I kept collecting street sheets, posters, pamphlets, whatever could still be found. Even now, I estimate the archive is only 80% complete. There are gaps, specific items I know are missing. This diagram is my attempt to visualize what I think of as the layers of the digger movement. The process unfolded like an archaeologist's excavation, collecting the most recent material first. What is not shown here are the roots and leaves of the movement, the English diggers of the 17th century, the beat poetry renaissance in San Francisco, the political ground prepared by the free speech movement or any of the radical social movements of the 1960s, not to mention the legacies that carry forward beyond that time. I'm only focusing on one specific arc of the diggers to get at their core ideas and what they created. Digger do was the diggers' own term for their social program to create and to enact a society based on mutual aid. Digger do is what historians call praxis, the translation of ideas into lived social forms. When I first began collecting digger ephemera, I started at the top layer, collecting what was being produced at the moment, and then worked downward back in time. Tonight, I'm going to reverse that process and begin at the bottom layer with the original digger papers, which began appearing in September of 1966 as anonymously distributed street sheets. Two boyhood friends from Brooklyn arrived separately in San Francisco in 1966 and joined the San Francisco meme troupe. There they encountered guerrilla theater, Ronnie Davis's idea that theater should both teach social change and embody it in lived practice. The two friends began writing down their observations about the emerging bohemian community in the Haight-Ashbury. Late at night, they slipped into the SDS office next to the meme troupe to type and mimeograph their broadsides. They handed them out directly on Haight Street and chose to remain anonymous. We now know their names, Emmett Grogan and Billy Murcott, but anonymity was part of their gesture. Someone suggested their ideas echoed those of the 17th century English diggers who resisted the enclosure of common land and attempted to build a society without buying or selling. The name immediately resonated and stuck. Within weeks, the Berkeley Barb was referring to these street sheets as digger papers. What you see here is as complete a collection as I've been able to assemble. Some are certainly missing, but taken together, they articulate a frame of reference that was highly unusual for its time and in many ways still is. Rather than survey them all, I want to look closely at two of these papers. Where is Public At unfolds as a litany of public spaces, streets, parks, schools, hospitals, transportation, naming them as public only to reveal how each is fenced in by rules, surveillance, and property interests, until public begins to read less as a common right than as a legal fiction. Laws against loitering and vagrancy appear not as protections, but as instruments of control. The call for an erection in the panhandle is deliberately whimsical, but its intent is serious, a demand that public space be reclaimed through presence, touch, gathering, and shared communion. What the diggers are doing here is still in words, but already gesturing toward action and performance, is contesting public space and calling for the commons to be reclaimed, much as the 17th century English diggers had done at St. George's Hill. The Panhandle, that 8-block long extension of Golden Gate Park that marked the northern boundary of the Haight-Ashbury, would soon become the first site of digger theater. The ideology of failure takes aim at what the diggers saw as the hypocrisy of hip, the belief that drugs, music, clothes, alternative careers, or spiritual poses offered an escape from the system, when in fact they often reproduced the same values: success, status, and a consumer mindset. Hip rebellion, they argued, was easily absorbed, packaged, and sold back to you. Against that, the diggers proposed what they called an ideology of failure, a refusal to play the game at all. Love, in this view, isn't something you consume or perform, it's something you live. It's unpaid and unmarketable. Free food, free theater, showing up day after day with no profit and no applause. To fail by the standards of the market is the point, because only by doing things for free can love avoid being sold and emptied of meaning. This sheet presages the conflict that would play out over the next year between the diggers and the hip merchants, culminating in Ron Thalen closing the psychedelic shop and joining the diggers. At the moment the diggers began mimeographing their messages to the street, an uprising took place in San Francisco's Black neighborhoods following the police shooting of a teenager in Hunters Point. The mayor imposed a curfew. The governor called out the National Guard, and Emmett and Billy were suddenly confronted with the gap between what they were writing and what the moment demanded. The next night, digger signs appeared all over the Haight, urging people to ignore the curfew. And within days, word spread that the diggers would provide free food in the Panhandle. What they innovated wasn't free food itself. The Catholic workers had been running soup kitchens for decades, but a new social form rooted in the reclaiming of public space. By bringing food out of private spaces and into the park, the Panhandle was transformed into a shared commons where eating became a collective ritual rather than an act of charity. Public space was briefly reorganized around autonomy rather than regulation. Over the 2 years that the diggers were in the public eye, they staged their critique through guerrilla theater. Their first street performance was the Halloween 1966 intersection game at Haight and Ashbury, announced by a street sheet declaring public nonsense nuisance. The action turned a busy intersection into a participatory game. Passers-by were invited to crisscross the street and form as many geometric shapes as possible. The diggers brought a 20-foot tall wooden structure they called the frame of reference, which participants at the free feeds had to walk through to receive digger stew. They also brought 2 8-foot tall puppets to the intersection game. When a police officer warned, "If you don't remove yourselves, you'll be arrested for blocking a public thoroughfare," one of the puppets replied, "Who is the public?" The officer answered, "I couldn't care less." The puppet responded, "I declare myself public. The streets are public. The streets are free." At that point, the police arrested the puppets and performers, revealing that the meaning of public was something enforced rather than shared. A month later, after all charges were dropped, the moment was frozen on the front page of the San Francisco Chronicle. 5 diggers on the steps of City Hall with Emmett Grogan flashing the V sign, a gesture that soon migrated into the culture as the hippie peace sign. What began as street theater ended as a public lesson in who controls public space and how it can be briefly reclaimed. Within a month of the first free feeds in the Panhandle, the number of diggers had already grown. The movement spread like an avalanche, starting with a single snowball and cascading down the mountainside. After the second major digger street performance, the Death of Money Parade, the Hells Angels threw a thank you party in the Panhandle. It was their way of acknowledging the diggers for bailing out 2 angels who had been arrested. The angels supplied the beer. The diggers set up a flatbed truck. 2 neighborhood bands, the Grateful Dead and Big Brother, climbed aboard and started playing. The result was the first free outdoor rock concert in San Francisco. It set the pattern for the weekly gatherings that the diggers staged in the Panhandle. And 3 people in the crowd that day would go on to trigger the next layer of this excavation. Chester Anderson and Claude and Helene Hayward were recent arrivals in San Francisco who attended the New Year's wail in the Panhandle. They were blown away by the diggers and immediately decided to set up a printing operation of their own, what they called the Communication Company. Over the next 8 months, the Communication Company produced around 700 street sheets like the ones you see here. At least that's the number Chester told me. I've managed to collect about 400 broadsides and broadsheets. If Chester's estimate is accurate, it means there's a gap in the archive right at this layer. From the moment it began operating in January 1967, the Communication Company became the main outlet for digger writing, but with a wider audience. The Communication Company soon joined a dozen other underground papers to form the Underground Press Syndicate. One of the ground rules was simple. Any member paper could freely reprint material from any of the others. Suddenly, digger tracts were circulating nationwide and before long, internationally. The Communication Company functioned as an instant news service for the Haight-Ashbury, effectively becoming the publishing arm of the diggers during the spring and summer of 1967. Chester and Claude and Helene finagled the purchase of the latest mimeographed technology, a Gestetner duplicating machine and stencil maker that made it possible to produce broadsides at remarkable speed. These street sheets carried everything from rumors of police action and sources of free food to poems, manifestos, editorial commentary, and artwork. They were handed out, stapled to poles, pasted on storefronts, turning the neighborhood itself into a living bulletin board. The output of these outrageous pamphleteers, as Claude and Chester called themselves in their first announcement seen here, left a dense, immediate record of digger deeds as they evolved day by day. Of all the digger ephemera, Communication Company material has been the most heavily collected, not only because of its sheer quantity, but also because of its overlap with beat poetry circles. Gary Snyder, Lou Welch, Lenore Kandel, and Kirby Doyle among them, many of whom became allies and in some cases participants, publishing their poetry for free as Comco broadsides. The Communication Company published digger events, ideas, and free services, including what became one of their most recognizable inventions, the free store, where everything was free for the taking. The free store turned gift exchange into living theater. Stories of serendipitous discoveries of discarded stuff circulated constantly. Judy Goldhaft, who helped run the Trip Without a Ticket free store, told a story about Army deserters who came in wearing fatigues, traded them for hippie clothes, and walked out free men. The cast-off Army field jackets piled up and soon became standard counterculture wear. The idea of the free store spread quickly. Here, for example, is a photo of the Black People's Free Store established by Roy Ballard in the Fillmore, which became a gathering place that embodied self-determination. The Diggers summed up what they were doing with a simple phrase: create the condition you describe. Later anarchist theory would call this prefigurative politics, but the idea was straightforward. Make the world you want now. Don't wait for some imagined revolution down the road. The free store was that idea made concrete. Needs were met through collective sharing. What goes around comes around functioned less as a slogan than as the operating principle of the free store. The invisible circus was the digger answer to the human being, which the Diggers criticized for the dichotomy it created between the audience and their idols on stage. The invisible circus was planned instead as a 72-hour, multi-room, free-form environmental community at Glide Memorial Church. Rejecting spectators and celebrities transformed the church into an ephemeral, self-organized space, what Hakim Bey would later call a temporary autonomous zone. Thousands of people moved through overlapping performances, debates, rituals, and absurdist interventions with no fixed stage and no single point of attention. At the nexus of it all was the communication company. Their portable Gestetner machines, dubbed the John Dillinger computer by Richard Brautigan, produced a continuous stream of flash bulletins. These were instantly distributed to the roughly 4,000 participants moving through the church's 3 floors, creating a printed record of the event as it unfolded. One of these sheets is the simple timestamp you see here, issued 8/27.5. The invisible circus became legendary not just for its sensory overload, but for what it demonstrated: a non-hierarchic, decentralized culture in which space, information, and authorship were collectively produced. The other sheet shown here, Brautigan's All Watched Over by Machines of Loving Grace, would soon resonate far beyond the moment, eventually becoming an anthem for the personal computer revolution. By the end of the Summer of Love, the hate had become frenetic, overwhelmed by tens of thousands of young people who pushed the neighborhood beyond its carrying capacity. In that moment, Chester Anderson published a final editorial from what he dryly called the San Francisco Communication Company in exile. Chester had already split, but in this last dispatch, he reported that the Diggers had just announced a new publication called Free City. With that, the communication company era came to a close and a new phase of the Digger story began. In Ring Alivio, Emmett Grogan explains that by midsummer, the Diggers had begun calling themselves the Free City Collective, in part because the name Digger was being used by groups everywhere, inspired by stories in the underground press. The change in names signaled a larger shift from Free Street to Free City. In October 1967, the Diggers staged The Death of Hippie, a label they rejected as a media invention. The full title, Death of Hippie, Birth of Free Man, was a refusal of the caricature and a clear turning point. Free City was no longer confined to the hate, but expanded into the city as a whole. The Free City Collective mounted a series of public events, poetry on the City Hall steps, rituals tied to the equinoxes and solstices, and Free City conventions. The work shifted as well. Instead of feeding crowds in the Panhandle, the Diggers were now feeding communes. The language of Free City began to sound less like protest and more like celebration. One street sheet asked a simple question: how do you want to live? As the movement matured, the energy of free moved indoors into reclaimed Victorian houses where communal life itself became the experiment. When the communication company departed, the Diggers took over the Gestetner machines and moved them into the basement of the Willard Street commune. There, in the fall of 1967, Free City emerged, a hybrid of newspaper, manifesto, poem, survival guide, and prank. The hard edge editorials and stark black and white broadsides of Comco gave way to a larger 8.5 by 14-inch format, filled with dense, multicolored designs layered with texts. Free City #1 and #2 mixed lists of free resources from San Francisco to Berlin with raps on paranoia, long hair, and hierarchy. A mock obituary of Bob Dylan, attacks on the underground press syndicate, poems, graphics, even an enumeration of erotic postures. When I placed a free ad in the intercommunal newspaper Kaliflower in 1972, asking for Digger ephemera, these 2 Free City sets were the first contributions to what would become the Digger archives. After the initial Free City magazine sets, the next pivot in Gestetner printing came in January 1968, when a newspaper strike shut down both the Chronicle and the Examiner. The Diggers began publishing Free City News, typically a single 8.5 by 14-inch sheet printed on both sides. To distribute it, they built wooden newspaper boxes and placed them on a few key street corners. When I cataloged the Free City News sheets, some of which are here, by the way, I was stymied by the fact that few were dated. What I noticed was that each issue listed the moon's position for the day and the exact time it would move into the next sign. Using an ephemeris, I was able to reconstruct the exact dating. Free City News functioned not only as a newspaper with the typical poetic manifestos, but also as a free store bulletin board. Personal ads offered free goods and services or requested the same. Once again, the social forum became the medium of information exchange. One issue of Free City News announced a shift in practice: free food every morning delivered to your commune. What had begun as a ritual in the Panhandle, with the Diggers bringing hot stew for the free feeds, became a delivery service, bringing fresh fruits and vegetables to communal households. The photograph by Chuck Gould captures a typical sidewalk food distribution. One of the groups that ended up on the delivery route was the headquarters of the Black Panthers in Oakland. In his autobiography, David Hilliard, the chief of staff of the Black Panthers, described how the Diggers helped inspire the Panthers' free food and breakfast for children programs. The free food home delivery service also became a model for the first food conspiracy, marking a key moment in the emergence of the natural foods movement. What matters here is continuity. Free food changing shape as the scale shifted, while staying rooted in the same idea that survival itself could be organized collectively outside the marketplace. In 1967, the Diggers held the first counterculture event marking the summer solstice. From then on, celebrations marking equinoxes and solstices highlighted a planetary consciousness that formed a central ethos of the radical environmental movement. In 1968, the Free City Collective planned a series of events from the spring equinox to the summer solstice, culminating in a citywide celebration on June 21st. Starting in April, there were daily gatherings on the steps of City Hall, where poetry readings and proclamations took place. The orange Free News sheet seen here was a proposal that was read at one of the City Hall gatherings. It called for the city to open unused buildings, redistribute surplus resources, support free community news, fund neighborhood celebrations, and return public spaces to unrestricted communal use. The mayor is invited to join in the celebration to usher in a free San Francisco. The article on the front page of the Chronicle shows the police reaction a week later, with the arrest of several diggers, one for wearing a mask and another, as seen here, for wearing an American flag shirt. The daily gatherings on City Hall steps would be a pivotal moment for the next layer of our excavation. Before they dispersed from their 2-year run that began with the first Digger papers, the Diggers produced a summary of their deeds and ideas, the Digger Papers, 1968, a 24-page collection that appeared as a special issue of the underground paper, The Realist, and as a free street edition distributed throughout San Francisco. Paul Krasner, the publisher of The Realist, provided 40,000 copies of the free version in exchange for the right to publish it. One essay in particular, Post-Competitive Comparative Game of Free City, functioned as a blueprint, a vision of a network of communes and collectives providing essential services for one another: food, housing, medical care, legal aid, media, transportation, education, car repair, even radio and computers. For many people who encountered it at the time, the Digger Papers, 1968, read less like an anthology than a social manual, a practical outline of how a free society might actually be organized without money or hierarchy. There's a copy over here people could look at. When the Diggers dispersed after the summer solstice celebration in 1968, they didn't disappear as much as scatter. What they left behind were seeds, practices, assumptions, and social forms that took root throughout the counterculture and continued to grow long after the original actors stepped out of view. One of those seeds took root in a commune that was initially known simply by the street where it occupied a 3-story Victorian. They called themselves the Sutter Street Commune, and they would prove to be one of the most consequential offshoots of the Free City moment. The first project they undertook was the Free Print Shop. The Free Print Shop was the successor to both the Communication Company and Free City News. Its story interweaves with the broader counterculture of the Bay Area, something you can see in the catalog of nearly 300 publications we donated to the California Historical Society in 1973. The Free Print Shop printed for anti-Vietnam War groups, feminist newsletters, gay liberation activists, community gardens, food conspiracies, and free theater troops, among many others. Taken together, the output of the Free Print Shop forms a cross-section of radical social movements from the late 1960s onward, a record of how ideas, struggles, and solidarities circulated when printing itself was treated as a free public resource. The Sutter Street Commune was founded in November 1967 by Irving Rosenthal, a San Francisco native who was a generation older than most of the Diggers and already deeply embedded in beat history. As a student editor of the Chicago Review in 1958, Irving had published the first excerpt of William Burroughs' Naked Lunch, touching off a censorship battle that pushed him into the center of the beat movement. Just before returning west in 1967, he published Sheeper, a novel of homosexual love that quickly became a landmark in queer literature. Irving came back to San Francisco intending to start a commune and to connect with the Diggers, which finally happened through introductions made by Allen Ginsberg. As the commune intersected with Free City, helping with the free food home delivery service and participating in the City Hall steps gatherings, Diggers learned that Irving had left a print shop behind in New York. At one of the City Hall noon gatherings, 2 Diggers, David Simpson and Vinnie Rinaldi, suggested to Irving that his print shop could serve the movement. The result of that serendipitous conversation was decisive. Vinnie went east, brought the equipment back, and the Free Print Shop was set up in the Sutter Street Commune's basement. Here is the psychedelic broadside that announced the opening of the print shop, inviting manuscripts, drawings, and manifestos, and guaranteeing free distribution. And there's a copy over on the table there. This is the Chief 15 offset press that the Diggers helped bring from Irving Rosenthal's print shop in New York and set up as the working heart of the Free Print Shop on Sutter Street. If Free City marked a break from the communication company's mostly black and white look through its use of color, the Free Print Shop pushed that shift even further. Its publications developed a style that was psychedelic, playful, and increasingly comfortable with queer imagery. This wasn't decoration for its own sake. The visual style emerged directly from the communal lifestyle, radical in its social form and unapologetically queer in its aesthetic. A year after the Free Print Shop opened to the free community, Irving suggested that a new member of the Sutter Street Commune take on a project that would come to define the commune and push the digger idea of free into its next phase. Stephen Dworkin was that new member of the Sutter Street Commune. The idea was to publish a newspaper for the growing network of communes across the Bay Area. The name Kaliflower was derived from Kali Yuga, the last and darkest stage in Hindu cosmology, a period of darkness before the cycle turns back toward the light. Stephen designed the iconic image of a flower sprouting from a skull, representing life emerging from decay. The title Kaliflower held both impulses at once, collapse and emergence, ending and beginning, captured in a single word that understood the darkness, but insisted on hope for the future. Here is a smattering of pages from the 3+ years of publishing Kaliflower. Every issue was unique. Each page design was hand-drawn, then photographed in the darkroom of the print shop, laid out and turned into offset plates to be printed on the Chief 15 press. Kaliflower ran for 165 weekly issues, beginning in April 1969 and ending in June 1972. The complete set comprises more than 1,600 pages. When publication ended, we assembled a complete set of Kaliflower along with the Free Print Shop publications and donated them to the California Historical Society. As an aside, CHS lost the collection for 25 years until a most serendipitous encounter, but that's another story for another time. Functioning as the central nervous system of a self-sustaining free community, Kaliflower was hand-delivered every Thursday to a network that grew from 7 to more than 300 communes across the Bay Area. Adhering strictly to the Digger principle of free, the paper refused advertising and money altogether, instead facilitating a gift economy through pages of free ads and coordinated projects like the Free Food Conspiracy. Its aesthetic, often psychedelic and openly homoerotic, sat alongside practical material, communal recipes, survival and gardening how-tos, tips on communal living, and essays inspired by earlier communal experiments, such as the 19th century Oneida community. One of the most distinctive aspects of Kaliflower was its distribution. Every Thursday, volunteers from other communes gathered at the Kaliflower House to help with the distribution of that week's issue. The pages had been printed overnight in the Free Print Shop by the commune's printers, often with no sleep, with plenty of stimulants, and a record player blasting blues and rock. In the morning, the loose pages were collated and side-sewn Japanese style with colored thread. There's a whole bunch of copies over here for everyone to look at afterwards. Each volunteer then took a dozen or so copies on a prearranged delivery route across the Bay Area. Delivery itself took hours, since every stop meant conversation, refreshments, and an exchange of news. The plywood Kaliflower board you see here, each one was fitted with a bamboo tube, were central to that system. This was where issues were left and where responses to the free ads were deposited, often marked, "Please reply," through the bamboo tube. In that sense, the medium was the message in the spirit of Marshall McLuhan. Beyond the ads themselves, it was the weekly act of face-to-face delivery that knit the network together. By the end of its run, Kaliflower reached more than 300 communes, with a core group in constant contact. Shown here are three of them. From top to bottom are Hungadunga, Kaliflower, and the Angels of Light. One of the early Kaliflower articles describes a decisive shift at the Sutter Street Commune. In 1969, individual rent was abolished and replaced with a common treasury, an experiment in trust that quickly proved workable. 2 years later, a similar move unfolded across the wider Kaliflower network. Food conspiracies had already been spreading through the counterculture, inspired in part by the Diggers' free food delivery service. First proposed in Kaliflower with a simple suggestion: let's get together and buy our food in quantity as close to the source as possible. The idea first emerged in Berkeley in mid-1969. By 1971, Kaliflower carried a more radical proposal that the communes most closely linked through weekly contact should stop paying separately for food altogether and instead pool their resources, guided by the principle, from each according to ability, to each according to need. This became the free food conspiracy. Several dozen communes combined their food budgets, ordered only what was needed, and centralized purchasing and distribution through a single commune, Hungadunga, two of whose members you see here making a delivery. The experiment lasted about 2 years before internal disagreements brought it to an end. Food conspiracies helped give rise to the collectively run natural food stores that began appearing in the mid-1970s and that continue to shape food culture today. The Angels of Light Free Theater emerged directly out of the Kaliflower network as a communal, queer performance collective that embodied the Digger idea of free as lived practice. The catalyst was Hibiscus, whose ecstatic street dancing through the hate, draped in flowered robes and headdresses made from discarded blossoms, drew people into his orbit. Out of that vortex came two groups: the Coquettes, who burst onto the gay hippie underground scene in 1970, and after a schism over free versus paid performance, the Angels of Light, who committed themselves fully to free theater. What the Diggers called life acting was central to the Angels' work: the refusal to represent social change symbolically, insisting instead on living it as fact. There were no tickets, no hierarchy, and no fixed line between performer and audience. Shows fused theater, ritual, camp, myth, and everyday life, marked by gender-defying costuming, queer spirituality, and what came to be called gender fuck aesthetics: bearded men in dresses and makeup and women performing without fixed gender roles. Announced and circulated through Kaliflower, Angels of Light performances became a vital connective tissue, linking communes across the Bay Area. After Hibiscus returned to New York in 1972, the Angels evolved into a collective troupe with a sustained commitment to communal joy and social responsibility. Over the next 15 years, through dozens of shows, they personified the tribal, communal counterculture that had grown out of the Digger vision of free, collapsing boundaries between art and life, performer and audience, and leaving a lasting imprint on the Bay Area counterculture. That brings us back to the surface of this archaeological dig. As I said at the outset, this introduction has deliberately left out both the deeper roots and the longer afterlives of the Digger movement, tracing only one arc among many. After the final Digger spectacle at the summer solstice in 1968, there was a broad dispersal outward from the city. Some went back to the land and helped seed what later became bioregionalism. Others carried Digger energy to far-flung outposts like the Black Bear Ranch commune in remote Siskiyou County. A New York contingent became the Yippies. Free stores spread throughout the counterculture, some of them still with us today. When I visited Occupy Wall Street with Billy Murcott in 2011, the encampment at Zuccotti Park looked uncannily like Emmett Grogan's blueprint for a free city. Free food, a free kitchen, free library, free lawyers, a free medical clinic, even free energy generation. When I later asked organizers whether they knew about the San Francisco diggers, many didn't. I mentioned that at a talk marking the 50th anniversary of the Panhandle Free Feeds, and Chris Carlson offered the most concise explanation I've heard. Digger DNA has diffused into radical social movements. So this is a list of sources for tonight's talk. I have handouts for everyone here on the table, and the same list is also available online in a clickable form at the address shown at the bottom of the handout, diggerfeed.org. Before I close tonight, I wanted to share a passage that has stayed with me for years from Madeline Stern, a New York rare book dealer and historian some of you actually may have known. She wrote that the work of those who live with books is to authenticate a reminiscence, ferret out small facts, make large inferences, and see connections, to work, as she put it, with skepticism at one hand and the prince of serendip at the other. I'm reminded of that constantly. While finishing my master's thesis on Kaliflower 2 years ago, Mike Marnell, the same Mike you saw earlier making a free food conspiracy delivery, sent me scans of meeting notes he had saved. The material arrived out of nowhere just when I needed it and became key pieces of evidence for my thesis. And there at the top of the first page in the list of people present at the meeting was my own name, listed simply as the note taker. A reminder that archives don't just preserve history. Sometimes in a moment of serendipity, they quietly return you to your place inside it. So I have a couple extra minutes. So I didn't have time tonight to delve deeply into every slide, but if we have a few minutes, I'd like to linger briefly on this one. The free food notice you see here comes from the Berkeley Barb, which ran a weekly events listing. Notices for free food first appeared in October '66 and continued every week for the next year. You'll notice the phrase that quickly became synonymous with digger feeds: bring your own bowl and spoon. The article Delving the Diggers appeared in the Berkeley Barb 3 weeks after free food started. The byline is George Metesky, one of Emmett Grogan's pseudonyms, borrowed from the name of the so-called Mad Bomber of New York. The 3 photographs were taken by William Gedney, a young New York photographer who had just won a Guggenheim Fellowship. He arrived in San Francisco in the last week of September 1966. These are the earliest photographs we have of the diggers. Gedney had an exhibition at San Francisco Museum of Modern Art in 2000, highlighting his work, but none of the digger photographs were included. I discovered these images by examining Gedney's contact sheets archived at Duke University after his untimely death. The photograph on the left shows a digger ladling stew from a 20-gallon milk can that Emmett and Billy had improvised for cooking and handling. The image below shows the gatherers just after the stew was delivered. Using Google Street View, I was able to confirm that this was taken across the street from the intersection of Oak and Ashbury. And then there's the photograph on the right. The young woman facing us, holding a sheaf of papers, is Cindy Reed. The 3 young men are each reading their copies. Cindy was one of the first half-dozen people who joined Emmett and Billy in preparing and serving the free stews. And I'm very pleased that Cindy is here with us tonight. Thank you, Cindy, for all your good works over the decades. And I think that's it. And I wanted to thank Alexander Aiken of Bolerium Books for suggesting this talk, and Kevin Kosick for arranging it. Many thanks, everyone, and also my friends in the audience, many of whom I've lived with for the last 50 years. Beaver is here from the Angels of Light. Laura lived in the Kaliflower commune a decade after I did. Laura just published a wonderful memoir called Art and Love, My Life Through Egg Tempera. She's an artist and a wonderful writer. And Gary, Gary's is an inveterate collector, and he inspires everyone who has an archival tendency. And Joseph, my husband, who I met at one of those Thursday cauliflower days, sewing up cauliflowers at the Scott Street commune. Joseph has been my lodestone for the last 55 years. So that's it. "46 minutes.
46 minutes. The gang's all here. You want to take some questions? Does anybody have any questions, or we'll go John first?
As I told you, I arrived in that neighborhood. I started at the University of San Francisco.
You're gonna have to speak up because we want to make sure we can hear you on Zoom.
Arrived at that neighborhood in South Fall of '66. I started at the University of San Francisco. And I've done a lot of free publishing here. But the thing that might really underline what you said is the reason that penny is still there is the Three River Gold and stopped.
Yep.
They were going to plow at the University of San Francisco. A guy named Warren Hinkle editorialized against it. There was a woman up in the neighborhood, a woman named Sue Bourbon.
Yeah.
I don't know if you knew Sue. She was amazing. Her ex-husband was at San Francisco State forever. These are the people that allowed that commons to move. And it's a very interesting sort of thing.
Oh, that's one of the things I have written about.
Good.
You're absolutely correct. The plan was to dig up the freeway and have an extension from the Central Freeway to the Golden Gate Bridge.
All the way through.
All the way through. And it's my contention that if it hadn't been for Sue Bierman and the neighborhood group that stopped, and they stopped it in I think it was April of '66 was when the Board of Supervisors voted it down, but it was a 10-year campaign. And I mean, it was touching.
Wanted it.
Yeah.
Papers all wanted it, but it was the neighborhoods.
No, it's a story that should be told. Absolutely.
So my other question is about something connects to our club. I asked you about Clifford Burke. Now, Clifford Burke has most of his working library here. He's still with us in he's issuing free postcards about Trump from Mexico, from his farm. But did you have any knowledge? You ever meet Clifford Burke? Because he had a print shop in that neighborhood about '67, and then he moved over to Imperial Street.
I'm a little fuzzy on Clifford, but Clifford Burke had connection with our commune, but I can't remember the details. But
He had a print shop somewhere on Cole Street or something.
I thought it was at one point I thought it was on Geary Street.
Well, it was later.
Later,
the first
okay,
page
okay.
was over.
Okay, yeah.
And he gave all our stuff, so I don't know whether he has any memories of this, but I can give you his address. He's in New Mexico.
Good. Oh, that's great.
Question, Matthew.
Now that the California Historical Society is out of business, did the collections wind up at the University of San Francisco Rare Book Library?
No, Stanford took over everything that CHS had, and they haven't processed anything so far as I know. Yeah.
So it's still there sitting in boxes.
Ben Stone's not here tonight, is he? No, but anyway, yeah, no, it's as far as I know, it hasn't been processed.
Project in process. We'll take one last question if there's one here in the audience. There's none on Zoom because we want to make sure you have time to come up and see some of the materials before we wrap up. Any other questions? Yes.
What was the economy like between '66 and '69? Why did this start? Was the economy bad?
Well, one thing that people always talk about that period was the surplus. There was so much surplus available, and so the free store was, was overloaded with things. So I don't know how, I mean, I still see free stores today. So, I'm not sure that that's such a valid argument.
All you have to do is walk through a
Did you-
neighborhood in Berkeley and find a little free.
You're okay?
libraries.
You sure? Great. Well, with that, we're going to wrap up and give you time here in the club rooms to look at some of the materials. Join me in thanking our speaker, Eric.
Yeah, feel free to, the cauliflowers are meant to be browsed through. They're not in Mylar. So you can look and you can see what the cauliflower issues, what some of the articles look like. And these are all original stuff, excellent.
So thank you all for joining us. You can come to any book club program online or in person by registering for our events online at bccbooks.org/programs. Thanks everyone for coming, and we hope to see you again.
Thank you.